All right, all right. Hello, everyone. Hello, and welcome to another episode of BIM After Dark Live. My name is Jeff, also known as the Revit Kid. This is episode 104 of the show, which is pretty awesome. Today, we're going to be talking about mixed use and multifamily projects in Revit. I'm going to be welcoming back Aaron Mahler in a few minutes, who you guys are plenty familiar with. I think he's been on the show maybe 5 or 6 times now in the last 3 years that we've been doing the live stream. And actually, this is going to be a great little follow-up to last year when he came on the show. We talked about groups and links, and he had some awesome tips about dealing with either or, and we sort of did pros and cons against them. And so this is a nice little transition from that with some focusing on documentation. After the groups and link episode, I got a lot of questions from you guys about not just the groups and link side of it, but also how to manage making documents, whether you approach it using groups or links, et cetera. So he's going to be using a real world project, which we'll introduce in a little bit. And it's going to be a lot of fun. If you're in the chat here live tonight, as usual, make sure that you ask questions, chat along. I'll be keeping an eye on it and feeding questions into the conversation. Be sure to subscribe to the channel if you enjoy this. This is a weekly live stream. Like I said, we're on episode 104. If you want to see the previous 103 episodes, head on over to live.bimafterdark.com. I see Tom Flaherty and Stephen Brosh and Travis and Paul, a bunch of returning folks here. Paul Obbins in the house. Hey, Paul, how's it going, man? Another recurring guest on this show in the chat there. So feel free to chat. I'll be keeping an eye on it. Before we introduce Aaron, what I wanted to do is also thank our sponsor for this season of BIM After Dark Live, which is BIM Box. So for the last 3 years, since the inception of this live show, it has been 100% run on BIM Box machines. So it's been streamed, run, and all of the videos and content that you've seen here have been using a BIM Box laptop or desktop. So if you're looking for a machine that has been designed and optimized for what we do, especially when it comes to Revit, Twinmotion, Enscape, Navisworks, you go on the list, then look no further than BIMBox. So if you're interested, head on over to bimbox.bimafterdark.com. I am still finishing the review videos of this Striker 4 you see here on the desk, as well as this Mech 16 laptop here. I apologize for not getting the reviews out during this live stream, but I'm getting there. So again, head on over to bimbox.bimafterdark.com, and thanks to BIMBox for supporting this channel. Ian's here as well. Hey, cool, man. We got a lot of great people here. All right, so it's time to introduce our guest. So without further ado, everyone, they can see you now, Aaron, so don't do anything silly. Welcome back to the show, man. How's it going?
Good. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Of course. Always great having you on. Like I said, I think this is 5 or 6 times now you've been on the live stream. So I appreciate you always willing to come on and share your knowledge with the audience and usually something you're working on or something you're passionate about. So I appreciate that.
For sure. Glad to, always happy to be here. Big fan. So definitely.
Before we jump in, for people who maybe haven't seen your previous episodes or heard of you and what you do, maybe talk a little about yourself and Parallax Team and what it is that you do.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm the director of Parallax Team. We're a team of 6 people who kind of handle all facets of BIM implementation, building companies' project templates. We have content libraries that we sell. We do training and implementation for architects, landscape architects, and some engineers. We work with owners. We work with contractors. We also actually still do a lot of project work. We get embedded with our clients on their project teams. And so the project that we're kind of going to look at a little bit, tonight is actually a project that 3 or 4 of us from Parallax have been a part of with one of our clients as well. So it's been it's a real model. So you might see some funky stuff in there, or some things that we may all kind of shake our heads at. But yeah, that's basically what we're all about. We kind of jump into everything. We do application development. A lot of John Pearson. He does a lot of Dynamo implementation as well, custom apps. Lauren heads up landscape implementation for landscape architects. She's got foreground in development as well as project templates. So we kind of cover the whole gamut between architecture, landscape architects, and contractors and owners.
Awesome. Yeah, so definitely head on over to Parallax. Is it parallaxteam.com or parallax.com? I think it's parallaxteam.com,
parallaxteam.com.
right? Okay.
Parallax.com was way more expensive.
Way too generic. I imagine it can mean all kinds of stuff. I'll put links below for that. I'll also put a link to Aaron's Twitter account, as well as any other links if you wanted to reach out to him. Anyone who has been around the BIM world for years is probably familiar with your work and some of the great stuff that you've shared. So we definitely appreciate that. So today we're going to be talking about multifamily, multi-use projects. As if anyone who's followed the last 4 episodes for this season, I've been kind of trying to focus it around the idea of construction documentation, but I'm sure we can go in a couple different directions. As I mentioned before, I get a lot of questions about it. And I think maybe before we dive into the project itself, maybe give us a little insight into when you hear about this is a multifamily project. I just wanted to bring in multi-use because I get a lot of those questions. Maybe as far as the multifamily in this specific project, how you guys sort of plan your approach to setting up this model. We don't have to dive into it yet, but maybe just the overall thoughts of how you plan linking, grouping, documentation, and so on.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's a lot that goes into it. And this project was actually started a little bit before our team got involved. And so the project team was really awesome about letting us come in and kind of rework the strategy together after the fact and kind of unroll some things and re-roll some things. But, we always tell clients multifamily, hospitality, healthcare, all have that mid-sized repetitious unit, whether it's, an apartment, a patient room, a guest suite in a hotel. Mm-hmm. And that's where kind of doing things with Revit and then documenting efficiently gets kind of, difficult or fuzzy. Mm-hmm. So, on this particular project, we have a, kind of a standard approach. And, if you saw Jeff's links versus groups, episode, we've worked through over the years a lot of trial and error between, using links versus using groups for the repetitious units. So to nobody's surprise, I'm sure all of the apartments are grouped within this building. The rest of the strategy was pretty straightforward. I mean, there are facade and design elements that are not constrained to each level. They're kind of modeled as a unified thing from the bottom to the top, like the entire exterior facade is that way. There's also a historic existing building where the facade is staying, and you can see that wrapped around the bottom of the building. Now in this project, that is a separate file, so then demolition happens in that other file. And if we were starting the project over tomorrow, we might not do it that way. That was kind of already in motion when we got on the job. Mm-hmm. But it's working fine as well. Mm-hmm.
So when it comes to, especially because this is this is a larger project, right? I mean, this is, and we'll see when we jump into it. It's a pretty big project. When it comes to, as you mentioned, the units being groups, and then the historical building, existing building being a link. As far as core and shell versus the fit out / groups, and was there a thought as far as how you wanted to break up those models in the beginning, or were you kind of dealt the hand that was given to you, and then you're dealing from there, or is it kind of a mixed bag?
Yeah, it's a great question. So again, I want to give a lot of credit to the project team. And so this is a project that we were working on with Michael Graves. And so everybody on the design team was really cool about being flexible to new ideas. And when there even was a conversation about like, hey, if we wanted to migrate the existing buildings back into one file, they were, amenable to that. But, I said, hey, that's kind of already done and it's okay. But we see a lot of clients and project teams that want to separate things out into files. And I think that's just, we all used to do that in CAD. Mm-hmm. Core and shell versus interiors is one that kind of really just chaps my hide, because you see this actually in construction documents. And I think I joke around about like Revit brain fog. And that's kind of like when you look at a detail and things are sloppy because Revit is sloppy. And then people just kind of glaze over and say, well, that's just Revit, so we can't fix it. And I always find that happens when a core and shell model comes together with like an exterior model. Mm-hmm. Like the things don't line up, and then everybody just kind of looks at it and goes, oh, well, there's nothing we can do. And I'm like, well, we can just shove it all in one file and not have to worry about that.
So no, that's an interesting case, because I do see, I can't tell you how often I see core and shell and interior fit out split up, especially when you start seeing taller buildings, 7 to 17 stories, whatever it is. And sometimes there is a separate package for that, right? Sometimes core and shell is the bidding package, then there's fit out packages, but there's also a lot of times where it's one building, one package, one bid, but it's still a core and shell and a fit out model. So in general, I guess, other than specific arrangements where you are specifically building core and shell, right? And then the fit outs are all a bunch of different packages. Is there a, on your mind, is it basically, the rule of thumb is basically try and get as much as you can into one file until it becomes too much? Or, I mean, how have you approached that? And let's say it's a 5-story, core and shell fit out is all part of the same package, all that good stuff. Is there a point where you're like, well, actually this still kind of doesn't make sense to keep it all in one file?
So I will say, and this actually came up at the beginning of the links versus group discussion. There's a giant asterisk on it, and that asterisk is if there are different packages of drawings that are going out, and they need to be under different permits, and they need to track revisions separately. Of course, because that does throw a big enough monkey wrench in things that then I'm willing to say, okay, now we're going to just have 2 files because there's so much other management involved there, right?
Right.
But for me, the first rule, the general rule is 1 building, 1 file. Now, with multifamily and garden style, that goes a little bit out the window, and I'm sure that question will come up in a little while, and we'll talk about that. I have a separate file open that we'll look at for that. But if I can, 1 building, 1 file. And look, like in later years, Revit files can get massive, and they do perform as long as they're massive because there's a lot of stuff, but they're done well. So this building's 23 stories. I want to say about 440 units. I might be a little off on both of those counts because it's been on, the drawings went out, so now we're just waiting for pricing. So I haven't been in the model for like a month. I forgot how big it is. But it can absolutely all run in 1 file. I would not have any qualms about putting these existing buildings in that 1 file either, if it was set up that way originally. Garden style, if it's me and I'm working on a job tomorrow, if I have 10 buildings in garden style, I do it in 10 files. But of course, they move so fast with having the same units in the different buildings that a lot of our clients have made the case to put all 10 buildings just lined up in a row in a file. So I've relaxed my dying on that hill, and we do have a template now for garden where there are 10 buildings lined up in a row, and my inner BIM child cries inside when I do it.
So in that case, those are 10 links, 10 instances of a link, or
no, they're actually 10 buildings all in 1 file, and they're not geolocated properly. They're all just in a row. And there's a lot of reasons for that, because garden style, you're basically documenting the building types. You're not documenting the instances of the building.
Right.
And Melissa in our office actually worked through a really cool workflow of like, okay, so look, in the garden template, then you've got these 10 buildings in a row, which is not correct at all. And you want to show the site plan. So she actually just worked through with a client like, well, if each building is then also on its own work set, you can then link it in 10 separate instances into a site file and position the buildings properly. And, the world is all good. I don't love the workflow, but as we'll discuss, you're picking the least crappy thing you want to deal with when you're talking about multifamily. So there's a downside to every approach, and garden definitely has those challenges as well.
Awesome. Great. So I think what we're going to do is we're going to jump in a minute so we can start looking at the actual file and start talking about those, or about actual real world examples. I think people are very excited to see that. I don't think I've shown your Revit screen yet, so they're all
no worries.
They're all totally anticipating. They can't wait to see it. And I have a feeling we're going to have some great questions. I know already there's some people in the chat that are either dealing with a couple of these different types of projects or planning on dealing with them very soon, including the garden style and row houses and all that good stuff. So I'm super excited. Before we jump into that, we're going to take a quick break and hear from, I think today we're hearing from Jerry, part of the BIM After Dark community, and we're going to hear about a little bit about his experience in the BIM After Dark community.
Hi, my name's Jerry Piscucci. I'm the BIM manager at Irwin and Layton. I've joined the community to learn some extra tips and tricks. Been working in Revit since 2010. I've been attached to Revit for a long time, always trying to push the envelope, learn more, do more, get more out of it. For Irwin and Layton, I do a lot of project coordination using Navisworks. When you announced that you were starting the community, I was really excited about that. I've been subscribed ever since you started the community. I feel like it's just a great resource to have between just getting answers from you, also having the entire community to be able to answer questions as well. Training tutorials I watch over and over again. They're just a great resource to have. And on top of that, all of the template files and sample files. At one point I had a question, how to make a jack arch. And I reached out, Jeff provided me with a video, and I couldn't get the pattern to align along the arch. With Jeff's video and additional help, I was able to get this jack arch to be modeled in there perfectly.
All right, thanks, Jerry. So if you guys are interested in the BIM After Dark community, head on over to community.bimafterdark.com. That's where I've got all of my full-length courses, template files, sample files. We do office hours. We're on office hour 75, so we do them basically every other week. We actually even just had a community-led office hour. So there was a conversation in the social feed, and one of the members wanted to share something, so we just set up a quick Zoom meeting, and then a bunch of members jumped on and talked about, I think it was general notes and code and zoning information. So if you're interested in leveling up your Revit and having some direct access to me, but also these incredible members in our community, head on over to community.bimafterdark.com. All right, Aaron, you're back, man. You're back.
Awesome.
I know it's always awkward for the guests because you don't get to see all the cool graphics and music that are happening. So I apologize for that.
Oh no, it's all good. We're huge fans of the BIM After Dark community too. So like I was game. The real funny thing is watching it on YouTube because it's delayed. So I'm like,
it's amazing. Yeah,
we're over here.
Yeah, I've got 4 different screens showing it, and there's different delays on all the videos here. So it is. I'm telling you, it's wild how I think it's like a 30-second delay on YouTube. Yeah. Awesome. Stephen Brosh is actually in the chat. He was on the meeting yesterday where we talked about the zoning stuff. Really cool. All right, so I think it's time to introduce the project. So maybe before we jump into the details, maybe just give an overview of the actual project itself, and I'll let you. I'll show your screen, and you can sort of run through, tell everyone about what the project is, and then we can kind of dig into the details of the setup and all the stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's an existing historic church in New Jersey, and I'm actually going to go look and see probably if I just go to from the ground, and we'll open up a picture looking at the whole building. And so the team was basically tasked with converting this historic facade that they wanted to maintain and keep and turn it into a multifamily building, of course. So there's a parking garage, on the base of it, and then starting at about level 5 and working its way up, there's units. And once this, it'll take a second for this view to pop up, but the facade, of course, wanted to leave some distance behind the existing church, but then it kind of walks out over the church tower. So the cool thing about it is the plan is different on every level. Naturally, from a unit perspective, it was a particularly fun project.
I was going to say define cool, because that's cool, but it's also could be a pain in the butt. This is no typical floor plan, right?
Well, I'll tell you what, though. I mean, for me, that's the whole fun. That was the whole reason to get into Revit. Is every floor is different, and every floor's plan is auto-generated, and we know what the geometry looks like, right? So there are units that stack. The facades are obviously different on every floor. And, the team worked really hard to kind of standardize where the units stack and where all the risers need to be and everything. But yeah, it was just a really cool project. And so if we flip to, a view looking down, let's see, if we go to this one here, you can see this is one of the floors. I'll call it typical, right? But we know it's not.
Right.
But one of the typical floors with the units in it. And I will just address one of the questions because I happened to see it during the community demo. So Stephen was asking about is there furniture in the units? And so typically for us, all the furniture would be in there. It's not in this one right now, but that was not a consideration because of Revit or performance or anything. It's just that there is a dedicated interior designer on this job who happens to be working in AutoCAD. And our plan has always been that once we got the finalized layouts of all the furniture, we were going to drop in Revit furniture. But literally, we just hit a milestone on this job like a month ago, and then we paused for pricing. So that is still going to happen, and I'll be dying to get you guys all images once all the furniture is in there because it's going to look awesome.
I can't believe that. It's a CAD interiors, man. Oof.
Well, it's every team is a little different, and we just kind of roll with it. So
I know. Awesome, very cool.
Yeah, for sure.
So let's take a spin around. Let's take a look at maybe some of these units and maybe how you approach the difference between the units and the actual core shell and whatnot.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the questions we always get about multifamily and working in units is documenting in context versus documenting in what we call a unit garden. We've somewhat started joking around this week because we've met a lot of new clients in the last couple of weeks, and we've realized that we call it a unit garden or a unit cloud. We have another client who calls it a unit boneyard, which for me is a little dark. We've seen it called the graveyard. We've seen it called all sorts of interesting things. But essentially for us, where the units all live is a completely out of context area. Now, in this file is a bit old because it was started several years ago. So in this file, the unit cloud or the unit garden exists at level 1, but way out of space, on the XY coordinates. In our template now, it lives almost down at sea level. So the units are actually way below the building. And that's because a client suggested it after we were discussing the fact that we all forgot that Revit has some really nice functionality where all schedules can be filtered by the elevation of the levels. And we completely forgot that. So you can tell an appliance schedule, don't schedule anything below the basement. And then you don't have to do any crazy filters that's like remove stuff that's in the cloud and you have to put that filter in every schedule. You can actually just tell every schedule, don't count anything below basement level 5, and everything in the unit cloud's automatically removed.
So that means you're not even doing fancy phasing or any stuff to that, right, anymore, if you don't want to, right?
And so with model grouped units, you don't want to try to phase the cloud or the garden because the phase of the one that you're editing affects the other ones, so it gets really tricky really quick. Yeah.
I have to just add real quick because people are adding in some of their terms for this, and Tom Flaherty calls it a unit farm, which I think is kind of interesting. And then Nick Buck says no man's land. Those are all very very good names for that. Yeah.
I like it. So in one of my first built lectures where I was talking about what used to be the Beck template, back when I was still with Beck Group, I referred to the legend phase as prehistoric time, and I heard about that at Beck for like 5 years after that. It was just like, this is prehistoric time and dinosaur arms.
Love it.
Great things.
Okay, so you have this unit farm, right, or whatever we want to call it, and this is down at sea level now, or this one is not.
So in this particular project, it's at level 1, and what I have on the other screen, just in case anybody wants to see the differences, I actually have the templates open that we use now. And the only reason that's a little fun to look at is just to show people that in the newest version of the template, we're always improving the template based on client feedback. And we got some multifamily projects from some clients. And one of the first things we realized is the units are always different sizes. Right. So the new unit cloud actually has rows of different sizes. And the other funny thing that we did is we actually changed them into columns now. So those are all basically studio sized, and these are all basically loosely 1-bedroom sized, and then up to 2s, 3s, and 4s, depending on if you're doing student housing. And then we've got 3 versions of corner units. But what we saw is in this older version where we just had them as rows, this would be unit 1 and unit 2 and unit 3. But the problem is our clients, the multifamily architects, they would be stacking them vertically because the depth is always usually the common dimension. Right. And they want to check where things align left to right across the units. So once we saw that they were doing that, stacking them vertically made much more sense because now you can come in and say, oh, geez, look at these 2 studios and here's how they line up and why is the toilet here and it's over there, so that just made a lot more sense. Yeah.
Is that in your template now, is that at a extremely low level? Is that sea level that you're talking about?
Yes, so this is now on a whole new level called the unit level, and it
Got
actually
it.
lives. It's somewhere above sea level, but like 250,
Ideally
350
below
feet
any
below.
elevation you would be building at, let's say.
Yeah, absolutely. And if we
Right.
were to actually go look, like if we just go look at it at an elevation view really quick, it's way down. So here is basement number 5 because our template has
Hmm.
55 levels just in case.
Hmm.
And I guess I've got this. I've got it cropped,
Cropped.
but I
Yeah.
mean sea levels like down here, and the unit clouds I think are like right there.
Right. Right.
So
Right.
they're well below the building. But the great thing about that is they don't show up anywhere.
Hmm.
You don't like go to 3D anymore, and suddenly there's a bunch of units hanging out there.
Yeah. No, that's cool. And I didn't realize that with the schedules. That's pretty neat.
Yeah, and actually, so I want to give some credit also to John Pearson and Lauren Schmidt and Sean Page from RDG, because once we realized or remembered that that was a thing you could do in the schedule, then it became a matter of we want to push that new filter into every freaking schedule we have in the template.
Mm.
And there wasn't a very simple way to do that besides like SneakerNet. And I was bouncing questions off all 3 of them because it was late at night, and we all kind of contributed to a cool little Python script that helped us shove a filter automatically into every schedule in the template. So just filtered.
Yep.
It's pretty awesome.
Scoured X, who is always on the show, so thanks for joining again, Scoured. Hopefully I meet you one day in person and know who you are. I don't know if you're a man or a woman or what your name is, but you're always on the chat. So asked about if you're cutting a section or I'm going to expand that a little bit. Elevations, sections, different things that if you have something at that lower level, sometimes it will pick it up and do it.
That's a great question.
I'm assuming you took that into consideration. So is there something that you've done to avoid that?
Yeah. So the cool thing is, and again, this project kind of morphed and changed as it went. But the other cool thing is, if we were to go back and look, when you're in the unit cloud, you can't see it. And so here we're in, actually, we'll go to what's called the Find Things Here view of the unit cloud. But if you were to put a giant Cartesian grid on this, the unit cloud is also completely opposite where the actual project is.
Got it.
So it's way below, but also the entire project is nowhere in XY plane, similar to where the units are. So it's kind of out of sight, out of mind. And also because sea level, so there's a different level for sea level and for the 2 units. So should you be near sea level and want to cut a section through it, you could always grab the 2 unit levels and shove them another 1,000 feet down, and nothing would break.
Right.
Great question. And by the way, if you haven't checked out Scour DX's Crazy Families, there's a whole thread on Revit forum about it. It's just awesome stuff.
Awesome. Very cool.
Awesome stuff.
Okay, so we've got this unit farm level, whatever we want to call it, of typical units, and you have them grouped, right? Or I believe
we do.
So the process, let's say we're starting this from scratch with the template. Is the process someone is in there at that unit level, and the idea is they can sit there and play with all this stuff while someone's doing the core shell, and then like how soon are they grouping that, for example, right? So at what point are you grouping it and pulling it over, and then is there tips and tricks to that process, that timing and everything that will help make documentation easier, for example?
Yeah, absolutely. So, the goal for us, right, is the unit cloud. They all have their own scope boxes. And part of the importance of that, the whole reason for using the cloud over documenting in context is pre-cartooning, having everything like ready to go. So if we jump into like a unit sheet, they're already set up. So someone's not doing all the busy work. Now they can just start designing units, and whenever they think that they have a unit laid out and that it's ready to go, we recommend basically grouping all of the innards of the unit, almost right away. Now, one of the conversations that we had even yesterday, and I noticed that Ian was in the chat as well. I was on with his group and we were talking about what about when you're trying to like move really fast and you're trying to design really quickly. I generally always group these units and start copying them around as the real thing right away. But we have done some workflows with some clients where basically they trace the interior of the unit with just a floor. So there is just a floor, and we call it unit A1. Because in early design, when you want to throw units around really quick, just throwing around a sketched floor is really fast. And no matter how lightweight you make that group, copying it around is always going to stink. We pulled it up yesterday, and I'll go off script and I'll pull this up really quick. I'm going to just throw this out there that this was something that John Pearson put together for this specific reason. But basically, we were working with TestFit on an initiative for migrating stuff to Revit, and John came up with this wild workflow where you have a floor that matches the shape of the unit groups, and you can just design using the floors, and then when you're ready, you can run this Dynamo graph, and it will find the group that you've defined and swap the floor for it. So in that case, now you've got like the lightweight floor,
right?
And of course, if any of you remember, like if you want to do like the legendary block diagrams, you can actually just have a floor type that's like 10 feet tall. Right. And now you have actual stackable blocks, but then you can convert it into the model group, and you'll see here back to the question from earlier. Here's groups with all the furniture in them, of course.
Right.
So that's just a fun little trick. I won't say we do that on every job because we don't, but it's really fun to be able to just drag floors around and then swap them for groups later.
Yeah. No, I like it, and I think it makes sense. And yeah, part of the reason I was asking that question is managing these sort of standalone objects while also defining the building, right? Because then those are going to morph a little bit as the overall building itself changes, right? And so I was curious about how those two play together. And so I guess to some extent, once you have sort of a general idea, and like you said, I mean, jumping it up there, copying the group, you could always go back and forth. You could also edit it, once it's copied, you could edit it in place up on the floor somewhere, right? And it's going to update the group down there anyway. So I think that's why I was thinking, like, how fast do you want to group this? Because in theory, if you get a basic and you group it, then you could dump it on the floors and you could actually modify it in place, right? If you needed to, and then still pulling it back.
Our rule internally is always that geometry doesn't lie. So making it real as early as possible is the best thing you can do. So on this job in particular, there was actually at one point in time, all the units got deleted out of the building on purpose because there was some redesign going on, and we were like, we need to reevaluate this. So then we had a whole initiative to put the units back in, which was a very methodical kind of thing. And at that point, kitchens and baths weren't designed yet. And even those were subdivided out as nested groups. So I think we have like 6 or 7 different kitchens or baths, right? So we tried to, and so Allison, who was on this job, was actually doing this really neat thing while they were designing the kitchens and baths. They had like a placeholder object that was just a square the size of the kitchen. And for a while we had just the squares in there. But again, our mantra was, as soon as we're ready, let's design that kitchen and get it modeled for real, because that's when all the drama shows up, right? Like when it's placeholders or when those floor objects are there, nothing's real. And the moment we turn it into real objects, that's when like the rubber hits the road, or the car hits a tree. And that's why we like to make it real as fast as possible.
No, I love it, and I think I'm definitely going to link to the groups and linked episode from last year, because I think if anyone who's interested in this stuff, I suggest you go watch that, because we dove headfirst into the benefits and the pros and cons of both groups versus links and instances and all that. But maybe just because we're on the topic today and we're talking groups, maybe like a few tips and tricks for people who plan on doing that. Obviously, go watch the other episode. But as far as the groups are concerned, some of the highlights of what to keep in mind if you plan on using a group. Grouped, whether it's apartments or hotel rooms or whatever it ends up being.
Definitely. Working with groups actually doesn't have to be as bad as it has a reputation for. And it comes down to like 3 simple rules. And the rules are just gospel, and everybody has to know they can't be broken. So number 1 is basically nothing in a group can ever be hosted to something outside of the group. And that's like huge when you think about like demise walls and exterior fenestration.
Right.
So this building, being that it's more of like kind of it's not like a stick built exterior wood wall with windows. So in garden style, there's a huge propensity to want to like put exterior windows in the model group. Well, you can't, because the exterior wall doesn't go in the group. So it can only go in the group if its host is in the group. That goes even more strict for face-based families. Face-based families should not go in the groups at all. And so a big lift that we did at Parallax Team is the majority of our libraries are now completely unhosted. Cabinets are the Achilles heel of apartments. Upper cabinets that are hosted or face-based is the reason most people have so much trouble with groups, and they just don't know it.
Yeah, so I have to jump in because I just had I posted a video a week ago on trusses, and it was during an office hour, so I was just banging through a demo, and I threw a base plate which was face hosted onto the truss, and I grouped it, and like it took me 10 minutes, and we're talking, I'm finally like, oh crap, it's face based and it's in a group. Well, that's why it's blowing up on me.
So if I can, one real fun story, and this is actually going to be a blast for the past if anybody from Beck is listening, but the way we actually discovered this issue is one of our healthcare teams wasn't having any problems with groups. And that's because if you think about a patient room, it has a head wall and a foot wall. And then a multifamily team was having immense trouble with cabinets, and they would mirror an apartment and it would break. And so I was convinced it was our families. And so I started tearing apart the cabinets. And then just as a joke, I went into a patient room and I'm like, look, the head wall works fine. So I edited the head wall and I made it a cabinet. And then it worked fine. And then I copied the cabinet over and everything broke.
Oh, yeah.
And so long story short, Revit had like a weird glitch a number of years ago where face-based families, you could only have one face-based family per face in a group. So if you really want to go nuts and you have face-based families, break your wall at every cabinet and it actually works. But that's insanity and none of us want to do it.
Of course.
just go unhosted. And of course, the third major rule is no line-based families at all. I love line-based families. I used to do shopping malls, so I have like dental moldings up the wazoo, but you can't put line-based in a group at all.
It's interesting because line-based you can do work plane-based, line-based. So you would think that those are essentially non-hosted, right? But yeah, that just must be something within Revit itself that it breaks. But to me it's because it's not hosted in anything, it would make sense, but I know it doesn't work as well.
They have a weird affinity for like remembering their actual original host level. So like you put a line-based family in a group that's on level 5 and you copy it up to level 6. The group on level 6, its line-based family is still on level 5. It's really weird.
Yeah.
One day we'll ask somebody at the factory and we'll figure it out.
Yeah, but that's not top priority, right? There was an interesting question from Nick about, and I think this goes along right along with the idea of groups and best practices, which is work sets dealing with multiple people, in a file, and then dealing with groups, and what are the challenges or best practices as far as how that can impact the process. And so that's something I don't have a great answer for. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that.
For sure. And so his question specifically is asking about like nested groups and doesn't that turn into a work sharing nightmare? And so there is a certain amount of this where you have to be careful, right? So one of the Achilles heels that I would love to one day see fixed by the development team, if it's ever possible, is, and I'm probably going to explain this poorly, but it feels kind of like when you go to edit a group, Revit may check out that group, but it doesn't check out all the instances of that group, or it seems that way anyway, until you go to hit finish, which is very scary. So the rule that we always give people is like you should never be in a group for more than like 15 minutes. I used to say 20.
Get out, right?
well, so here's why, right? So the funny thing about what we call the Christmas mode, anytime you've got that finish and that cancel button on your interface, you haven't done anything until you've successfully finished. So I tell people, if you're working on a slab edge for an hour, like every 15 minutes, just cheat and close the sketch and hit finish so that your work can get saved. So can it be a work sharing nightmare? Absolutely. It absolutely can. It doesn't have to be though. And the way I like to break that down is that's not really a Revit problem. Like if kitchen 1 is in unit A1, B1, and C1, and you've got folks messing with those 3 units and you've got a different person messing with that kitchen, I personally would say you have a project management problem anyway, because how can it be that like somebody's working on unit B1 and somebody else is jacking with kitchen 1 that's affecting unit B1 and they're all doing it at the same time. And one of the biggest problems that we see multifamily projects have is they put way too many people on the projects. So yeah, like, have 1 or 2 people focusing on those tasks at a time. And I know that's easier said than done, but yeah, you just can't throw, masses of butts at units at the same time, for sure.
So has John made an add-in yet that opens a countdown every time you get into one of those sketch modes? Because that's what we should have. Just a red digital clock. So every time you're in a slab edge or editing a sketch or jumping into a group, it just ticks down, right? And then get out.
Actually, what's funny is when he was building Sync with Central Timer, that's what scared me. Is I was like, listen, that's going to trap somebody in a sketch mode, and he's like, no, because you're still in a mode, and Sync with Central Timer actually waits until that mode is done before it continues its count, which is really cool. But
Yeah.
somebody should do that. They should make a mode where it's just like it counts down and
Definitely. So let's jump in. I want to talk about so that was a great overview of groups, and I appreciate that. I think that's helpful. And again, everyone, I'll post a link. You definitely want to check out the groups versus links, and maybe let's jump in and talk about how to manage the documentation side of it, tags, dimensions, notes, whatever it is, within this environment of groups, unit plans, and then spreading them out throughout the whole model.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so, and what we're, so the units themselves are obviously all documented inside what we call the garden or the unit cloud. And so that really alleviates where a lot of the documentation is going to happen. And that kind of leaves the rest of the building drawings to show the units, but kind of show them whether you want them half-toned or out of context, or, if you want to show them full line weight, I support that as well. One of the things I try to encourage folks to not do is like start trying to back all of this into work sets for some kind of visibility thing. And so like what you're looking at here is pretty basic, but the team wanted to just kind of half tone the units because, they have their own unit drawings. And so here we really want the focus to be on the core and the shell and all of the documentation.
Right.
And even with this, a lot of people have a tendency to say like, let's throw the units on a work set and then we can just gray out that work set. And again, once you go down that road, you're kind of, the process is working against you. And so what's really interesting is every object in these units actually has an instance parameter that says the word unit in it. And a visibility and graphics filter is doing the half toning here. But what's really cool is we'd have to be crazy to do that manually, right? So here's a fun little nugget that we really enjoy. So I'm sure any of you who use groups as much as we do know that Dynamo does have kind of an Achilles heel of trying to edit groups in that it really can't. It'll just break the groups apart. However, text parameters that are set to vary by group instance can still be edited if those elements are in a group, because you don't need to go into the group context to edit it. So this is a parameter that I can edit right now on the fly. It's not going to break the group at all. And you'll notice that wall just became on a halftone, right? So
just real quick, that's a text-based instance parameter. So that's why you're able to grab elements within the group and actually modify it without breaking or undoing the group, so to speak.
So just to clarify, what you have to do, it has to be a text parameter. It cannot be a yes/no parameter, and that's a big deal. Like that trips up a lot of people.
Right.
But when you make a text parameter in the project that is instance, you can set it to vary by group instance, and that means every single wall in every single group can have a different answer. Now, we don't really want them to have a different answer, right? We just want them to all say unit.
Right.
But it's an interesting workaround, because if we tell it, now we're going to fill it out wall by wall instead of group by group, now Dynamo can do it. So we have a Dynamo graph. And again, I want to give this project team some super credit, because they are not all Dynamo users. But we kind of explain like, hey, you don't have to know how to edit Dynamo. Just open it and hit run. And we do it once every couple of days, and it just half tones everything that's in a unit. But the other cool thing is, now that data is in everything in the unit, you can use it for scheduling things that are in units. You can use it for, do you want to auto filter things out or auto tag only what's in a unit? So, I mean, sinks, they'll have the word unit in them. Clothing rods, the word unit. And we can literally start to classify stuff by what's in the unit or what's in the amenity spaces just by a parameter that Dynamo is just slaying over all of the units as fast as it can. And the graph takes like 30 seconds to run on this building. It's not a heavy lift.
And so one of the things that I want to highlight there, because I just find this to be such a common practice, is that the work sets as visibilities is just obviously visibility control is a massive practice across the everyone who uses Revit. But the one thing you mentioned sort of in there as well is when you do that, right, there's only one work set applied to one element, right? That's the only thing you can do, right?
Right.
And so when you start thinking about filters, and you also did an episode with me on filters, and so maybe I'll link to that. And that's probably to me one of the most underutilized tools inside of Revit is the filtering tool. But just by what you showed there, right? Not only can you use that, but now you can actually have multiple parameters that you can use depending on where you're looking.
Absolutely.
A work set it's it, right? You assign it a work set and that's it, right? So now
and it's a one-trick pony. Yeah, it really doesn't do a
right,
whole lot
right. So
for
here
ya.
you could say unit, and then you could have a subunit type. You could have, and so all of those things can exist within those elements, and then you can use those to control visibility. So there's much more flexibility in it. Forgetting about all the other issues with what you mentioned with groups and the work sets versus the items and the group itself having its own work set. So just another reason not to use work sets for visibility.
Absolutely. And one of the other things, and again, I want to give kudos to the project team here because, the original ask was, hey, do we have some way to turn the units off? Because we've got them in other drawings. We don't need to show it. It's so busy.
Right.
And after a quick conversation, and again, I'm always happy when there's a project team that's willing to listen to constructive ideas and feedback. I said, hey, what about the thought of like really graying it out, but not turning it off? Because for me, this is like, and since the moment I saw 3D modeling for architecture, I'm like, this is the whole thing is we want to see, more information is never bad.
Right.
I want everything visible all the time because that's how you see conflicts. And it's like, I don't want to hide the unit ever because, and there's nothing wrong with this unit here, but I'm like, if this unit is completely hidden here, maybe I don't notice what it looks like with this particular column if this column's not on every level. Right. And so I'm like, yeah, let's gray it out. We'll still get the point across. We'll get the drawing to be softer, but we'll see all the reality of it. That's just why I love like using filters instead of work sets, because even though you can do a filter by work set, now you're doing twice the work. Typically when people put it on a work set, they just go into VG work set and they turn it off. And I'm like, that's over.
And there's a question by Thomas in the chat, which was, how do I control the visibility of these groups if I have this file linked into my structural model? That seems to be easier with work sets. But
so Thomas asks a great question. The cool thing is, if somebody in architecture has already done the work to run the dynamo graph, put that data in the units, and now all those items say unit in them, you can actually just copy the filter from the architecture file into structural, and it'll work.
Yep.
And the nice thing is for structural, you have a really good use case for let's actually turn the units off. So let's just do it real quick is we'll just jump in here and I'm going to go to that filter and it says, hey, I'm included in the unit. So instead of saying like, let's turn it all, halftone, let's just kill it all. We'll just turn it all off. Now, in this case, you're going to see a really funny artifact, which is the unit tags are going to disappear also, probably. But we can get into that a little later. That's because once you hide every element in the model group, obviously the model group tag doesn't have anything to tag.
Right.
Oh, they did stay. Okay, cool. So we worked around it. I mean, like, eventually you just have to make sure the filter doesn't hide every single element, right? And so, but yeah, so you can absolutely use the same filter. Yeah. And something that we always talk to consultants about is there's a whole bunch of things that us BIM folks love to like write documents telling consultants how to do stuff. And I don't know, like a bunch of you in the chat may have this. Who has an email that's like really convoluted that explains to their consultants how to load in their shared parameters to fix their drawing list?
Right.
I'm like, if you just copy the drawing list out of the architecture model, it automatically does all the shared parameters for you. And I'm like, no one should ever load a shared parameter manually. Just copy it from somebody who's already done it.
Exactly.
But copy the filter, transfer it in, and you're golden for structural.
And I think, again, it's just another testament to the power of filters over work sets and so on, because it's a great example even for a structural model. Let's say there's something within the units now where there's a shear wall for whatever reason in the unit. On the architecture side, they can even have that. It can be called unit, but then they have another parameter that says shear, yes or no, or it's a shear, no shear. And now you actually can control the visibility of those elements separate. If it was work set, it would just be unit, right? Or if they wanted, they could have a work set for shear and work set, but that's not usually how it's used, right? So
absolutely. And I love that you brought that up because it didn't come up on this particular project, but we did a student housing project where there was actually a structural implication for the wall that went down the center of the quote unquote unit or the dorm, if you will. And that's because they obviously had, framing that was basically going across the unit.
Yeah.
It was too big of a span, right? So they weren't offset. I'm just drawing like an idiot. But all
I like it.
All that said, they did want to show those walls in a different capacity than the rest of the unit. And so what we did in this project was very reactive and it was very quick. So all we wrote in that parameter was the word unit. But once you've got Dynamo doing that for you, it's very simple to write unit underscore and then what the thing is.
Right.
Unit underscore rated wall underscore shear wall underscore whatever. And then everybody can just have that data work for them, which is really cool.
Now, because that's an instance parameter within the elements themselves, could you, if you wanted it to all be the same across the one group, could you edit the group, select it, hit the instance, and it keeps it? It's just a matter of if you want to modify it outside of that, or?
That's a good question. So if you set it to vary by group instance, I don't think.
Yeah, that was the setting. I meant, yeah, if it's an instance also set by vary by, yes, that's kind of what I meant there. Or then you no matter what now, you have to hit it in the group instance.
I am going to. I honestly don't remember.
That's all good.
I do not think it propagates through the other ones.
Got it.
Like if I write dog here, then like do the other ones say dog or do they still say unit? And I'll bet they still say unit. But that's a good point, because you could do it inside the group. You could do it without.
If you weren't anticipating, I guess, a variety across it, then in theory you could do it within it. But yeah.
You could. Now the bummer then though is now you're relying on somebody remembering to go spot check every group.
Right.
Because once you have to edit the group to do it, you can't use Dynamo for it anymore, right? So just to check, I'm going to go up to level 10 because I'm unless I unluckily picked the wrong group, like the same group should be there on level 10. So we'll go.
Right, and the wall will be dark instead of halftone, ideally, right? So that's how you'd be able to tell.
So well, if it propagated, it'll be dark. Right. I'm betting it's going to be light.
Yeah.
But if I'm wrong, come by booth 355 next week, and I'll get you a free drink. Yep. So it's still light.
Got it.
So when they're set to vary by group instance, they do not propagate changes.
Got it. Which is fine. I was curious. I'm in my mind just thinking about different processes. And there was a question quickly, which I think you kind of answered it in a different sense, which was structural model being part of the same model as architecture, and not in a project like this.
I love that question. Okay, so I did misspeak earlier, and Vin, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Thank you for asking that question, because earlier I said one building, one file. I should have said one building, one file per discipline. And the only reason I want to clarify that is there have been some projects that we've done for contractors where we have decided, because of what we were doing, we would put it all into basically one file. And that was a colossal mistake. And I'm just gonna open a picture really quick, and then I'll drop it on the screen if I can find it really quick. Okay.
So the purpose there was to try to keep it all in one file for the sake of downstream use all being in one place, or?
That's a great question. So really, the only reason we were trying to do it in one file is it was a lot of concrete, and there were a lot of architectural elements that like wanted to join with the concrete.
Cast in place concrete in general. Now that you mention it, there is a unique. Unique approach to that, and overlap between architectural and structural can be kind of interesting.
Yeah, and so we tried it on Dickey's Arena, a reconciliation project that we did for a contractor. OneDrive's being awful, so it was just a big arena that you've probably seen pictures of on our blog and stuff. There was no real technical issue with having architectural and structural in one file, except there are downsides to every discipline in Revit. And the downside for structural when you're doing complex concrete work is when you join a lot of pieces together, you pay that price every time you sync with central. And now everybody in architecture gets to suffer with you. So just to give you an example, we had Dynamo auto join hundreds of concrete beams with the slab. We carved out literally thousands of penetrations from the slab, and async with central turned into like a 25-minute ordeal.
Which is funny because 10 years ago that was like, that's just what it is, right?
That was Monday.
Yeah, you sync and you go get a coffee. Right now we're like 20 minutes to sync. Oh my god.
Exactly. So I mean, there was no downside. We actually modeled that with LA Feast partners who worked with us on the reconciliation project. They're awesome for concrete modeling. We loved all being in one file. It just stunk for that reason. So for that reason, I would say different disciplines, different files. Yeah, for sure.
It's funny because like when you mentioned with the contractor side, it's like the downstream use. I can tell you in my experience, it actually ends up being easier when there's more models, mainly because a lot of the downstream usage are very model to model, and so like even with MEPFP, like there's some design teams that will do MEPFP models all separate in the design side, and it's actually useful for us just because of the whole model to model tools that we're using, as opposed to like if we get an MEPFP model all combined, a lot of times what we're doing is we're creating a container model, filtering and conditioning, and making views to pump out the individual disciplines, just because so many downstream downstream tools are very model to model to model to model. It seems to work a little better on our end. But
Absolutely. And on this job, MEP was all separate. So we have a separate mechanical, electrical, plumbing model. I think fire protection was in the plumbing model. But again, so we always, my mantra there is, I'm kind of weirded out by some like BIM folks who want to try to like tell their consultants how to do their work. I'm like, I want to know what's best for you guys as consultants. And if you like working all in one MEP file, that's cool. If you like working in multiple MEP files, that's awesome. So if we were to like go look, yeah, we've got all separate models in here, and they were great. Burton Engineering was on this job, or is on this job, and yeah, they were champs. Mohammed, I doubt you're watching, but if you are, can't wait to pick it up again after pricing and start.
Is there?
It's been awesome.
I'm curious. Were they grouping for typical units on the MEP side of it, and then the dispersion and distribution throughout it was kind of non-grouped, or how did they approach that?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I will totally own this and just say that like the tactics that we use for grouping the units, this is like strictly this is great for architecture and interior design thing. What I hear is it really doesn't fly for MEP.
I've been, and that's why I asked the question, because I know I've been on projects where they've tried it, and there's just something about the systems and the way that MEP systems work that I feel like I haven't successfully seen it done personally. Maybe fixtures, and that might be it. But even that, if you're connecting to the fixtures, can create an issue.
Right. And so, there's a lot more nuance to MEP in terms of pipes changing size as they move down the building, and, ducts changing size as they move down the building. So my inclination is it's not really as beneficial to them anyway. And if I'm in MEP, or if somebody in MEP asks me for my advice there, it's to try to leverage like what we're doing with Dynamo to try to help us with documentation and the groups. Instead, I'd be trying to leverage Dynamo to help auto model that stuff, not as groups, right? So let's assume it's all going to be what I call loose, which is just all hanging out in the building.
Right.
Then just all do it loose. They can still document their units down in the cloud, of course, which we recommend they do, because if they don't, then our unit plans won't show any of their things. Like if they only do the one in the building context, then we have to jump through some hoops to get the unit plans to look correct.
Yeah, so let's talk about that then. So as far as documenting now these units versus the core shell, so there's a great tip on showing the units and using these parameters to halftone it. You're using a group tag to show the unit, the unit within the floor plans, and then obviously within the overall floor plans, most of the dimensioning is core shell type of dimensioning. So then as far as the typical unit documentation, are they doing that down in the cloud area, and then it's on a typical unit plan? Is there any tips and tricks on detailing the groups? Are they, because it's happening down there, is it easy? Can they just go about detailing, or are they detailing within the actual group itself?
Yeah, that's a great question. So a couple quick things. So what we tag the units with up in the buildings is a multi-category tag, because I want to say like 18 months ago, Troy Gates posted on Twitter, it was probably 2 years ago now, maybe it was 2.5, that if you used a multi-category tag, you could suddenly tag model groups. And we were all like, wait, model group tags don't exist. Oh, they do. And the funny thing is then, I guess a year later, they made it so that you can add in your own shared parameters into model groups, and now you can put those in the multi-category tags. So tagging units is now awesome. Our unit matrices are all scheduling the model groups and doing all the unit calcs based on that. But back to your question, if you do multifamily or mixed use or hospitality or whatever, and you have the unit garden, the whole point is the sheets are pre-set up in advance. Like you are not manually cartooning sheets, because then it's just a matter of you drop into these plans after the units are modeled, and you just start doing what I call the tag, I'll call it tag disbursement. That's a more PC name. The spray and pray of tag and dimensions to just hit everything in the unit. Now, on this particular project, of course, they have, a floor plan, a ceiling plan, and then we've got elevations kind of all on one sheet. I will just show you that our goal with the unit plans is we never know what types of drawings clients are going to want to do. So our typical unit sheet is floor plan, accessibility plan, RCP, circuiting, power and data, furniture, and finishes. And then we actually have elevations even pre-created. Now, the elevations are 100% going to be in the wrong spot. but
Right.
quantify the amount of time you take to make an elevation, name an elevation, drag it on a sheet, put it in the right spot, give it it's ridiculous.
Right. Yep.
So we just drop them here, and if they have to move, they have to move. So the goal for us is spend more time designing the unit, spend more time annotating it, and like, geez, let's not cartoon stuff anymore. That stinks.
Right. Especially if you're doing these projects, more than once, let's say. So then, as far as the actual dimensions, tags, notes, and stuff like that, does it matter then if they're built inside the group?
That's a great question. It's a great question. So we like to harvest a lot. We like to pull these things out, have a group library, have a standard, have an office standard of like a whole farm of units. But I encourage project teams to not worry about that during their job. So these annotations are all loose right now. They're not part of the model group.
Got it.
But the cool thing is, for anyone who's not familiar, all you have to do is edit a model group and hit attach a detail group, and then you can start clicking on all the annotations. So the reason I tell the project teams not to mess with it unless they have some burning desire is I don't want to slow them down on the job.
Right.
And if we want to harvest it later, it's 5 extra minutes of work for us to do it in post versus them fighting with it on the job. So yeah, we just drop the annotations right in. The biggest question we get about the unit cloud is showing the demise walls, the corridor, and the exterior fenestration, because they're not real here. Right?
Yeah.
Like,
so let's talk about that. So
Yeah.
how exactly are you approaching that then?
Yeah. So there's not a perfect system for how this goes, right? And we have to point that out because, so let me just say, on this project, it was actually harder than most because the facade on this job, because it's not regular and because it's not, and I don't want this to be offensive, but we have what we call like architectural postage stamp facades, right? Where it's just like psh, windows, psh, siding, psh, whatever. If you have that, what a lot of our clients will actually do, and I love this approach, is they'll have units that are grouped, and then around the building, they'll actually have exterior facade pieces that are groups as well. Now that works really well because if unit S1 always has this particular facade at the corner, then you just take that facade group and you drop it
Copy the instance there,
context.
right?
Yeah, and it does the exact same thing. Now for this project, because the facade did change at every single location, it was a little more meticulous about copying stuff into the unit cloud so that we could show it properly. And everyone's like, well, that really stinks. And like, that's super manual. And I'm like, newsflash, there's no solution out there where you're not doing something manual. So we're picking between, so the danger, right, is if you document in context, you've got risk if the unit moves, risk if the design changes and the unit swaps. You've got risk of having units documented on multiple levels and a level changes. So there's a lot of risk there. Risk if you have the unit cloud is you do need to check the facade, but it's a known risk for me. So I'm always willing to kind of just take that chance. And
so in that instance, if the facade changes, for example, is the process you're copying that chunk and pasting it down in the cloud, or you just have like an 8 foot tall or whatever piece of it that you're modifying, in context or, in relation to it?
Yeah, great question. So on this particular project, I think we would just go and modify it in the unit cloud. On the projects where they do the postage stamps and they have the model groups, it would either change automatically, but then if they had to swap it, they would go recopy a whole bigger piece. This building was actually kind of interesting because it's one of the few times, at least for us, that we've been in multifamily where the facade had, in a cool way, like no regularity to it, right?
Every floor is different, right? I mean, every
floor, and every floor, but also the some of the facade elements walked to the side as they went up the building, and so because of that, not only was the facade different at every unit, but on every level, each unit had different facade elements because fins were like moving to the side, but the units were staying in one spot. So it was really cool. But all that to say, like, this was a special case where we didn't copy grouped facade elements down to the cloud because that wouldn't have been beneficial anyway.
Yeah, and in that case, you're only representing one instance of that in the typical plan, right? So it's not like It's not like you're sitting there
Exactly.
trying to show like, 17 versions of type A just because the fin moved, right? That type of thing.
Right, exactly. And this is what I try to explain to folks as well, is when you're working in multifamily, everyone's like, well, we have to document the units perfectly. They have to show all the windows perfectly. And I'm like, newsflash, that's never actually what's happening anyway, because, materials change from the first to the third floor. We have stone, then we have siding, we've got a water table.
Right.
The windows go from mold to being, bigger, and we don't document every condition in the units. We think we do, but we very rarely do that.
Right, right. And so it is, yeah, it is a semi-manual process on a project like this, but again, if keeping in context that unit A, you're only showing it once in your typical, but it actually has 17 different versions of the facade.
Right.
You're really just showing that typical case. Although I guess to some extent, if there was something important on the facade that was moving that impacted it, there may be something you want to think about. But I guess you're looking at the overall plan to see when those conditions happen, right?
And this actually goes back to exactly why I love keeping the units visible. And this actually came up on this job because there are PTAC units in the bays and the PTACs move. So, I mean, and again, I can't give this team enough credit, but like you can actually see some of this on the envelope. So there's like a double group of fins that changes position in the units, and there's an operable window and there's a PTAC, and where they land has to change based on what fits in the facade. And again, a lot of folks are like, well, I've got units in the unit cloud, so just turn them off in the plan. And having them visible is how we know that this will not be a problem later, because we've already looked at it, right? And if you don't look at it early, again, you just pay twice as much and look at it later.
Right. So that's good. That's a cool tip for the exterior wall. How about demising walls? What was the approach here, and what approach have you seen work?
Yeah, that's great. So demise walls for us never go in the groups. So they're always separate. And I'm going to terrify every Revit user in the chat in a second.
Oh boy.
So we don't ever endorse putting demise walls in the unit groups. And of course, that means the corridor doors are not part of the groups as well. That's all part of what we'll call the core and shell. Now, for teams that like to be brave, sometimes we do group the corridor elements as well, especially when they're similar from level to level. Because then you don't have to deal with all the changes of the corridor and everything. So folks always ask me then, well, if the demise walls aren't in the group, how in the unit cloud do I make sure this is exactly where the unit ends? Because I have to put fake demise walls in the unit cloud, right? And in Revit, what's the first thing everybody always jumps to? For construction lines.
Probably reference planes or hatches or detail items, filled regions, something like that.
Yeah, so most of our clients are like, reference planes, and reference planes are great, and we'll put them around the entire unit, and I die on the inside because reference planes, they automatically go the whole height of the building, and
again, they show up fucking everywhere.
They do show up everywhere, and this is where people are like, groups suck. I accidentally grabbed a group and I added it to another group on accident, and what the heck? And my groups broke apart. It's the freaking reference planes. So this is what's going to make everybody cringe, and I love it because. So here's the thing: whenever you hear me say something ridiculous, my only ask for the whole BIM community is, before you judge, do it on a job. Then come back and judge. It's fine. We will use model lines around the interior of all the units. So
in the cloud, in the unit cloud?
They are part of the unit group.
Got it.
So they will populate the whole building. They will be sitting in the unit cloud, and there will literally be model lines that show the interior face of where that unit ends. Now everyone's like, oh my gosh, there'll be 10 million lines in the project. It's a freaking building. There's 10 million lines anywhere. But here's the cool thing. Everyone's like, we don't want to see all those lines in plan. Hey, you shouldn't be seeing them. They should be covered up by demise walls and facade. If they're not, it's because your unit's the wrong size. But them being model lines and being placed on the ground means that you're not seeing them when you're a level above. So if we flip back to, we'll go down to unit A11 here, and I'll put myself on the spot because I don't know that they're actually here. But let's go in this group. And by the way, I'm going to give you guys another tip. If you work in Revit at all, you need Juan Osborne's filter more. But if you work in multifamily, it'll change your life. Oh, and I'm in 24, so I don't. Okay, so I forgot to turn it on in 24, but oh, maybe you can't do it in the group. Okay, how did I not realize that? It looks like I'm gonna be made a liar, and the lines are okay. The lines might not be in all the groups in this project, but you will see them if we go into perspective here. So again, this kind of goes against the rules because I just said you won't see them normally, but on this building, you'll see them because of the wedge facade. You'll actually see them poking out.
I see. Yeah, because and so it's actually interesting because are you keeping those as just black lines? Or are you doing like a magenta or something that makes it so it's like, hey, I can see these because it's not right,
It's a great question. We have a whole line style for them. So we have an object style under lines. We have one that's called unit boundaries. It shows up as like a soft halftone red and transparent, or not transparent, but like a red halftone line. I guess I have them turned off right now, which is kind of ironic. So there, if I turn them on now, they'll probably come on.
Because you didn't want to see them everywhere.
Because I didn't want to see them, and then I'm like, oh, you want to see them everywhere. That's awesome.
No, but it's an interesting approach, though, right? I mean, it's definitely better than reference planes in the groups. For Christ's sake, like that's crazy, right?
We have this weird aversion, and I think this stems from like the early 2000s when computers like really sucked, and you had like there you go, and we had like a 25 meg graphics card, but people have this aversion to model lines because they're 3D, and I'm like, it's the best thing about them.
Right.
They're in 3D. They show up everywhere. So what everyone forgets is you can do it with detail lines, but now it's an attached detail group. It doesn't show up in your views automatically. It's not always there. You have to place it. It's actually worse. Just model stuff. It'll be fine. But what I wanted to show you is, so if you work in multifamily specifically, but if you're working in Revit at all, the Juan Osborne tool called Filter More, the reason it changes your life is
right there.
multifam, is because have you used it at all?
I haven't, but I use the pick tool in Revit, which is same idea, right? It's similar concept.
No,
similar concept.
So Filter More actually can replace the Revit filter that shows up in the context ribbon.
Okay.
And it's I probably should have done this in plan. I'm probably really going to regret that I did that, but that's okay. That's why we opened like 3 of the building here. We'll bring another one over. We'll start over. Because when you all see this, if you do work in multifamily, you'll understand the importance of this immediately. I'm going to go to level 9 and we'll just open a plan. So imagine you had to change a floor to floor height. And Revit did the nasty fixed groups things, which newsflash, it'll do it every time you have to change a floor to floor height. And you always hit make new group types because ungrouping is the death of your project. So now you have a whole bunch of groups that have the stupid number 2 at the end, and you have to go find them all and replace them. So Filter More is a tool that will actually replace the regular Revit filter if you choose to let it. But it gives you an itemized breakdown of what's in the categories.
Oh, okay, got it. No, so I was thinking it was like the pick tool in Revit where you choose the object you want to select, so you're not selecting across the whole, selecting all the stuff. So this is going to let you see types or other information within the filter itself. Got it. Cool.
So it's probably, like I said, it's probably not turned on. Okay, so this is your normal filter, and you'll see it just says model group 62. That's not useful. So if you set JO tools to do it, it will replace this button. And apparently I just didn't do it in 24, but this becomes what you get in your filter.
Awesome. That's really cool.
And this right here is where the money is.
Oh my God. Yeah.
So now I just come in and I say, grab all of the 11.6s. That's a bad example. Grab all the 8.9s and we'll switch them to whatever, 8.91 or something.
That's awesome.
So if you need to make wholesale changes in a model, I think I want to say it's like $10.
Yeah, no, we will definitely. I'll get a link from you for that, and I will post it because that is a super useful tool, and more than just multifamily. If you happen
to be watching, like triple the price of it or something, because like
double your price right now, Juan. Do it.
It's crazy, but it really helps with like needing to swap all the units out and stuff. It did finally do it. So again, it's just awesome because then you come in and you're like, bam, and it's pretty fast.
Yeah, no, that's awesome.
I don't know why that's just not built in, and it also has this really neat thing. And again, it's great for multifamily. So you can say, grab all the unit AO1s, but then you can also say expand to all of the same type. And now I will grab all of the AO1s in the project.
That's really neat, yeah.
Which is really cool. So it just makes like swapping stuff out way easier, which if you have groups you have to do a lot of, and it's just not helpful to get a list of, I have 16 model groups. That's ridiculous. So we just actually traded our selection for all of the AO1s in the project, which is really cool.
That's awesome.
So
there was one question by Ben in the chat about I guess their demising walls are typically double stud walls with an airspace between them, and so he said that makes, or ultimately they're part of the group. But I'm thinking in my mind that still wants to be a demising wall, I would guess, right? Just a wall type with it.
It's a great question. So we have those as single wall types, and so I don't want to, I don't ever like to just say like, oh, my way is better. What I would encourage those teams to think about is something that happens a lot is when you try to split the demise wall in half, and you say, well, this stud is going to be in this group, and this stud's going to be in the other group. What tends to happen then is the ambiguous distance in between them does not end up exact.
You're right.
And so like
you're letting people power nudge an air gap.
You are, and then and it gets especially interesting if it's a UL assembly that depends on a prescribed distance.
Right. Which it probably would be in this case 100%.
And there's also cases where you have and this is always interesting. So for us at Parallax, the difference between what we call like a WWAB, where it's a back-to-back wall, is this one can have a UL assembly because it has the bracing between the two. And so if you've modeled it as a half a wall type and a half a wall type, now you have to like dummy tag it to say that's one assembly, and then you're hoping somebody used the right wall type on both sides. I definitely get the ask, which is, again, if you have hosted content, you are in a tough spot because you need the demise wall in the group.
Right.
Now, the good answer is rebuild all your content, or buy a bunch. But if you don't have the resources to do that, or the allotment to do that, then breaking the demise wall in half can work. But not all demise walls are double stud, so that does get a little tricky. And we do see firms like break a stud in half.
Yeah.
Have like half demise wall.
Yeah, that's tough. But I can see where that can be challenging. I guess in my mind, I'm still thinking demising walls need to stay demising walls, right? And
for sure. We prefer to keep them.
If preferred, right?
Yeah, we prefer to keep them out of the group. Honestly, even if I need something in the group at that point, I'll put like a finish wall inside the group, even if I have to cheat because the finish is paint. Like I would model a second gyp layer or something over the top of it, because I really don't want demise walls in the group personally.
Awesome. Very cool. Very cool. All right. So, and
Ben has reference planes.
Oh no!
I'm just kidding. Ben. Everyone does it differently. These are just opinions. I'm just very opinionated.
I could tell you as someone who I spend a lot of time opening other people's models, as I know you do, right? And there's two things, and I love scope boxes, let me tell you. But like when I open a model that has like thousands of scope boxes and then also thousands of reference planes, it drives me nuts. And it's just a visual thing. Like, oh my goodness, it's just because they're everywhere. They're everywhere. No matter what you do, like they're there.
Yeah. And we see the whole gamut. We see reference planes. We see families for datums. And the really interesting one for me, and I'm sure you've come across this, Jeff, in construction, is there are some big 3-letter acronym firms that make standard practices out of the dimensions go to the datums, not to the walls. So there's dimensions going to like markers or grids or reference planes. And then when you zoom in close enough, the wall doesn't line up with the reference plane. And you're like, do I RFI it or what do I do now?
What is this gap here? What is this? If I zoom in forever, there's a 256 of an inch gap, right?
Oh, I'm talking like inches. We see it all the time where it's like a wall is listed as being on this horizontal or this vertical datum, but when you zoom in, it's off by like 1.25 inches. And so it's weird because now the contract doc says the wall goes where the datum is. Yeah. But we know the wall moves 1.25 inches, and we're like, do we RFI it to try to solve the design problem, or do we just jack up the building and build it?
Yeah.
Like that's like, do I want spam or spam?
Right. We're doing a lot of robotic layout, and so those questions, we're obviously RFIing that because there's a lot of questions when you start saying, okay, we're going to take where the wall is, so we want to make sure that this is where you wanted the wall to be. So there's a lot of that discussion. We're definitely, as opposed to like, we'll fix it in the field based on RFI response. Like, no, we're making sure that we understand what that is. Awesome.
And that's what I mean, right? Chris Bay's out at Hawaiian Dredging in Honolulu, so they've got a whole bunch of our libraries and everything. And he sent me some great pictures because he's got like all of the Parallax doors and everything, and all the frames are actually modeled, and they've got it doing the paint on the ground on the slab thing with the robot. It's just awesome to see that.
Yeah, it really is. There was a quick question from Brandon about when you're using model lines for for groups, is there any thought on the finished face of the demising wall, and if that how that impacts it?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. And so this is going to be where like firms' opinions kind of change on this, right? But when I think about what is a typical unit, it is from the finished face of the wall and in. So if in one location a wall is going to have 2 layers of gyp, and in a different location it's going to have 1 layer of gyp, if the units are really supposed to be typical, then the walls should be pushing in the other direction outside
Right.
of that unit. If they're eating into the unit, that actually does create some coordination issues, and we see that in hospitality
Oh my
more
God.
than healthcare. Yeah,
Dude, healthcare. I can tell you right now, typical patient rooms
Yes.
is the most
Yes.
frustrating thing on architectural documents
Yes.
in my life, and it's because of what you're talking about, where it seems typical, but there's just enough changes that it impacts everything, right? And so yeah, I feel that. I think I think
actually,
I mean, I guess I think you have to go to finished face, and you have to expand, ideally expand from the finished face. That would be your model line, but
absolutely. I mean, for me, if the wall needs to get thicker and encroach more on the units, then for me that is a different unit. And again, so Jeff, we actually worked with a contractor and remodeled all of the head walls, because again, the patient rooms were elevated as being typical, and then we started to go in and look, and like some were fire rated walls, some were different stud thicknesses, and we're like, that's all supposed to be prefab head walls. So we ended up remodeling it.
we do it all the time, unfortunately.
Yeah. But again, like especially in hospitality, where guest rooms, they cram so much into those demise, like the rain leaders are coming down the stud cavities and there's no room. So for me, I always want the demise walls to be modeled accurately, and then the model lines definitely go on the finish face. Because I want the unit to be clear of that wall. If it's not, I want someone in design to fix it.
Yeah, and again, having those model lines there is a great way to see, what impact that that extra layer of finish has on the space, right? So because then you can see right there, hey, it's an inch and a half into my space now, because it has
absolutely
Durarock and some tile, some crap like that. There was a question from Joel, which I think if you go back, Joel, and look at some of the stuff, you'd probably see, but it might have been hard to tell because you were always in a plan view, which was, are those units 2D or a hybrid of 3D and 2D for those cloud units?
Joel, that's a great question. So we operate on the all 3D all the time philosophy. And full disclaimer, that's not for everybody. So whenever firms reach out to us and they're looking at our content libraries, we like to tell them up front, like, we believe in modeling everything. If you don't want our content, because it'll drive you nuts. So as we mentioned like earlier in the call, like furniture's not in yet, but that's just a timing thing. It's just not done yet. So yeah, we believe in putting everything in 3D. Again, also for the benefits of the other disciplines.
Right.
I'm sure a bunch of you on the call probably have like the 2.5D toilet, and nothing will chap somebody's hide like going in to do 3D coordination and the toilet's just gone. It's just not even really there.
So I'm interested. One thing I thought of while you're saying that is, ceilings, soffits, and stuff like that. I know that can be something that, based on, level to level, for example, if the floor heights are different and whatnot, that might change, or is that something that you're still building within? You're trying your best to keep within the unit, and would that be considered a different unit? Let's say it's a 9-foot ceiling versus an 8-foot ceiling. Everything else is the same except for the height of the ceiling, because maybe the floor to floor changed or whatever it is in that level.
Yeah, that's a great question, right? So we will do different unit types Revit wise.
Yep.
So there might be an A1 9 feet and an A1 12 feet. Now in the model group tag, they might both just say A1. And again, if the schedule is sort by type and not itemize every instance, they'll just both schedule as A1. But for me, it's super important. I mean, a 9-foot ceiling and a 10-foot ceiling aren't the same. And, again, you could shortchange that in Revit to save yourself like 10 minutes worth of time, but then you miss some coordination issues. And to give this project team credit again, Allison and Curie, who were working on the units, they even came up with a strategy where when that happened, inside and I'll just use the A1 9-foot and the A1 10-foot example, all of the guts of the A1 were subgrouped So when they went into A1 9 feet, they were really editing both of them because obviously only the ceilings and the soffit were the different pieces of the top half.
Right.
So they actually had them subgrouped, which I got to be honest, when they asked me, I was like, I don't know if I would do that because I'm afraid someone's going to wreck it. And they were like,
yeah,
no.
it sounds scary in practice, right? When you talk it out loud.
They killed it though. They were like, no, we got this. And so they did it, and it was really cool. So yeah, I like the ceilings to be in the group as well, with the light fixtures. And again, light fixtures and ceilings is one of those things that a lot of multifam clients are like, we're just going to leave it out of the units. And I'm like, I understand that there's a unit plan and the unit RCP shows where the lights go, but I should be able to rip into a building, like a building ceiling plan, and see all the lights and all the air terminals and all the diffusers in all the ceilings, because it's still a coordination issue. Like only having it in the unit plan is just pushing the work to somebody else.
Right, and exactly, and then you're downstreaming, and that's generally speaking, that's the model, model first mentality, right? And I run through that all the time, where we're dealing with, how much do we need to model in this area for concrete, for example, when you really just model these corners where there's a bunch of rebar, and I'm like, you don't know the issues that are going to come up until you model it, right? You're pretending that like between this area and this area, there aren't going to be any issues because it's a simple part of the project. It's like, well, you don't know that unless you just model it and see, right? And so that's a great, and again, I asked the ceiling question because we see that as well in healthcare, especially too, where it's one typical room, one typical ceiling, and then sometimes there's no ceilings throughout the entire building in the full building model, that kind of thing. So
absolutely. I mean, so just to expand on that, I mean, John Marlowe and I had a conversation about showers, right? And we were working on a content library. We were expanding our shower and our bathing library. And John and I, like John, he goes down like these awesome rabbit holes, and he starts talking to me about the way shower inserts get placed and the flange that has to go under one layer of gypboard but over another, which means there needs to be 2 layers of gypboard. And then we start talking to the clients in question that were asking about the additional showers, and it's like, hey, we have the new families built, but they don't work with the wall type you have in the bathroom. And we felt kind of dumb asking that question, but then the client came back and they were like, oh shoot, we need to go change all those bathrooms. And it's like, this is what we're here for. Like, this is why. So I mean, again, we put it all in the model. And I did see Brandon's question. So do we consider level of detail with the content? We totally do. The difference is, I think the biggest, and I don't have any paper evidence of this other than the way all of our models perform, but I have a steadfast belief that the amount of workarounds people do to eliminate 3D geometry makes the models perform worse than just having 3D geometry. So for instance, this model's big, it's 1.2 gigs just for architecture, but every handle's on every cabinet, it's on every door. It's, there's, everything is there. We will do reductive LOD. So like at course level of detail, some stuff will disappear. I will not model in a separate piece of geometry for course level of detail, because now I'm carrying around another bag of luggage, right? So we'll remove stuff at lower levels of detail, but I really believe that just having clean geometry for everything and not having 16 masking regions and lines in every view of the family, and then just relying on the awesome development team to make performance get better over the years. If you're not aware, 24 is 20% faster at regenerating a view. I've tested the numbers. I can send them to you. So 24 is like lightning fast, and it just gets faster every year. So we do LOD, but I recommend just shove it all in there.
Yeah, I mean, it's true. It is true. And I talk about this all the time when I'm, working with an architect right away, and we're the CM. It's, LOD is one thing, but at a minimum, having an object there that represents the object that you want to be there in 3D is still better than absolutely nothing, right? So for sure, if you want to put a box that's 24 inches deep by 6 feet wide and say it's a cabinet for now, I'm still rather have that than a detail item or a line in a floor plan, right? And so it's one of those things where it's like, and to your point, like, I mean, these models are going to get big no matter what. Like, it's these buildings are big, these projects are big, and I've never thought about that before, where it's like the workarounds that you do in the 2-dimensional side of it to actually make your drawings when you don't model the 3-dimensional side could be worse for your model than actually just having the elements there,
Sure.
which is interesting.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's kind of crazy. It's a lot of the times we don't think about the soft cost of the person efforts that we put in, right? And units are a great example. So like, well, groups can be kind of a travesty. So like, let's work with this other system. And we talk to people who, do the super family thing for units or whatever.
Yeah.
And then you start adding up the hours the team takes. Like, I had to go into a kitchen to add a cabinet, and then I hit reload, and now it takes 90 minutes to reload. So I have to wait. I'm like, 90 minutes. I'm like, it's a kitchen.
Right.
And you've got somebody just sitting at their desk, like on Facebook, because they're waiting for a cabinet to reload. And so I'm kind of like, we don't have those kind of budgets, right? We need to just all keep moving.
Awesome, man. No, this has been great. Is there anything on your list that we didn't touch on that you want to hit on before we wrap it up?
Oh man, I think I'm trying to think. So the only thing we didn't really, get to talk much about, and we could always do another one on it, is folks do ask us about the difference between garden and tower style, right? And so people will always tell me, they'll always hear me on the internet advocating for like a single template for an office. And unfortunately, the difference between tower style buildings and garden style buildings is the one exception where we do actually have a whole second parallax template. And the reason for that is because our normal template is one overall plan and 9 partial plans. That makes one whole building. But once we start talking about garden and people want to have multiple buildings, and then there's always the chance that that building doesn't fit on a sheet, now we end up with 9 overalls plus 18 areas. And so because of that, there's not a great way to automate this. We don't have any capability in Dynamo to move or reorient scope boxes. And even if we did, over here we have 1 overall plan and 9 partials, and over here we have 9 and 18. So if you wanted to have it in one template, you'd have to have both sets of scope boxes and a whole truckload of extra views so that you could just have Dynamo delete one set. And that's just like asking a lot of it. And my one hope is that eventually maybe we'll get some ability to control scope boxes programmatically, at which point then everything that we have in our garden template could theoretically get rolled into our master template. But right now we do carry 2. And so for the folks who do garden work, there's a lot of the same things that apply for garden work, and we could spend another whole session on that.
Yeah, and the difference there, I think in the very beginning, people were asking. First, I think the first question, I think some people were wondering what you meant by garden style. I think somebody did answer in the chat, but what you're saying there is there's multiple buildings essentially. So like think row houses, townhouses, that type of thing, right? So in that case. And maybe we don't go down that rabbit hole today, but I think I think your point was well taken, which is that the approach to something like that, which could actually maybe be the same thing with mixed use, depending on the actual setup of it, right? In the sense of sometimes you may have mixed use where there's different buildings within a same strip mall, for example, right, or something like that, where you approach it this way, as opposed to maybe like a mixed use fit out type of commercial building where you have tenants on one single floor plate or something like that, right? So where you're approaching it, but it is, again, you have to approach it a little differently. And I do have these discussions a lot, and I'm sure people are always contemplating this, 1 template versus 2 template versus 3 based on like market sector or specific building types. And I think there's always a give or take, right? And that was a perfect example where it's like the cartooning and setup of the project is beneficial to have the 2 templates, and it's too challenging to try and keep them in one. So it makes sense to spend the time to manage 2 templates just because of that efficiency of having the cartooning and the scope boxing and all that stuff set up.
Yeah, and it is still true, like all the downsides that we tell firms about having multiple templates, it is still true when one of them is garden. Like our garden template is not updated every single time our main template is. I wish it was, but Melissa and I only have so much time in a day. So one becomes the lesser maintained, which is unfortunate.
Awesome. Great, man. Well, Aaron, thanks again, dude. This has been wonderful as usual.
Hold on one second.
Oh, sure.
I didn't have a kid break in, but I have a wife in pajamas, so she gets to be on the broadcast.
Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
103 people are seeing her live right now, and then a couple thousand will see it tomorrow. So
awesome. I will tell her that. She'll love it.
Awesome. Tell her we appreciate the cameo. Well, again, thank you for coming on. I'm sure you'll be back on the show again, so I won't worry about it. Any final words for the audience and as we wrap it up?
I mean, for 20 years, we've been believing in model it all and it will save your project and it will help you in the distance. And, if you're having some kind of trouble or you're trying to model more and projects aren't performing the way you want, or you need something, just reach out to any of the six of us because this is what we do. And yeah, just shove it all in there.
Yeah, for sure. I appreciate it, man. And I won't be going out there, but I think you said you are going to be out at AU next week. So,
We are.
so definitely.
We're in booth 355.
Awesome.
Anybody come by just to say hi, whatever, grab it, pull up a chair, hang out. Just look for the giant Parallax Tower at 355.
That's awesome. Yeah, so definitely go say hi to Aaron. Tell him that you saw him on the show here, and he would love chatting with you. Aaron, thanks again. I'll put all the links below. If I missed any, let me know. And you guys have been amazing. Over 130 people hung out, and they stayed
Nice.
on. They stayed on
Nice.
for an hour and a half, which is incredible. So I
Very cool,
appreciate
guys.
that to
Very
everybody.
cool.
Make sure you guys subscribe to the channel here on YouTube. Again, thank you to Bimbox. So head on over to bimbox.bimafterdark.com. As well as community. Don't forget to check out the BIM After Dark community. So that's again at community.bimafterdark.com. A lot of the people you heard in the chat are actually members of the community, so you can see them as well as me and hang out there. And with that, if you guys are heading to AU next week, enjoy your conference. I won't be out there, unfortunately, but I will be live streaming on Thursday. So if you're out there and you want to jump onto the live stream while you're hanging out, feel free. If not, have a great weekend, have a great trip, and you guys are amazing. We'll talk soon.